Thanks, David. You might ask why we're doing this, and there were a couple reasons. Many years ago, we had these transfer pricing retreats at Baker McKenzie, and we did these as training programs, these mock maps, and they were a lot of fun. I think this is more important today because the level of any dispute resolution right now seems to end up in competent authority with a map. If you go to appeals, you only have 60 days after the closure of the appeals conference to decide whether you want to accept or go to competent authority. And if you do, the competent authority will take into account the resolution, but they won't be bound by what will take place at appeals, and you're starting all over again with competent authority. So if you follow the way that the trends are, and particularly when we do transfer pricing, we're dealing with cross-border transactions, it seems likely that most of the cases are going to be resolved in the future through MAP. So what we wanted to do was come up with a mock competent authority, and unfortunately we're not going to have the secrecy here, but we do have people who are going to be playing roles, and let me introduce you. I'm going to start at the far end. Is Shanwu Yuan. Shanwu is with Baker. He's going to play the role of the Chinese competent authority at SAT, and he knows that role very well because he was a senior executive with SAT for many years, and Shanwu is with us in New York, but he kind of commutes back and forth to China, which is a lot more difficult than the commute I have from Connecticut. I'm looking next to, well, let me take it apart. The counterpart that's going to argue with Shanwu is Imke Gerdes. Imke is with us in New York, and she is, I want you guys to congratulate her. She's a German admitted lawyer. She's an Austrian certified tax expert, and as of yesterday, she has the pleasure of being a member of the New York Bar. So we're trying to figure out what other degrees and locations she's going to stockpile, or is she going to now practice law and enjoy life? But she will be the Chinese representative who will be arguing with Shanwu. Next, if I look down there, next to Shanwu is my buddy Dale Hill. I've known this guy for years. Dale is with the Gowling's firm, but he's going to play the role of the CRA competent authority, and he knows that well because for many years he was the CRA competent authority. And there are probably few people that I know that are more outspoken than me, and Dale is one of them. So we're going to have a lot of fun with Dale. Well, actually, where's Mike Colborne? Mike, you have the pleasure, if I may put it that way, of arguing with Dale.
Yeah, I'm the victim, I mean volunteer.
There is some truth to that, and I can't pronounce the name of your firm. It's Thorsteinssons?
Something like that.
Something like that? Okay. So you will be the taxpayer's representative for Canada. Next to Dale is my buddy Steve Wrappe, who kind of takes second to the more in level of opinionated people. That falls into line with the three musketeers of Dale and myself. I've known Steve for many, many years, and I actually met Steve when he was at the APA program. So he will be the U.S. competent authority, and Steve is a partner at KPMG and a prior participant in this wonderful program. And arguing with Steve is Liz Stevens from Caplin and Drysdale, so good luck. But Liz is going to have a very interesting experience, as will Steve, because when we go through the case study, we're talking about a U.S. company, and it has cross-border transactions to Canada and China. So as we start, Liz will be arguing to Steve and to Shanwu and to Dale, and then we'll work our way through. So how this is going to work is we're going to start off with Liz. She gets 20 minutes to make her case on the case study that I'll read to you, and she will argue and have a dialogue with any of the competent authorities that want to ask questions and raise points of contention. The competent authorities will withhold a lot of their comments. They will just raise questions because when Liz is done, then we're going to go to Mike, and he's going to argue the Canadian side to Dale. But by the same token, because there's a U.S. involvement, Steve may be jumping in and asking questions. And then lastly, we're going to go to Imke, who's going to argue with Shanwu. But while she's arguing with Shanwu, she also may get comments from Steve, because she will be the taxpayer's representative. So they will each have 15 minutes. When they're done, we will take a total of 20 minutes, and the three competent authorities will argue among themselves. So just envision that this is taxpayer reps may be sitting there, they're going to be quiet, they're not going to say anything, but this is going to be that secretive kind of discussion that Dave was talking about. And when they're done, we'll take a 5-minute break. You guys make notes of who you think should win, who you think gets the best case, and then in that 5 minutes, these guys will decide how they're going to resolve the case, and they will report that to you, of which we'll save about 5-10 minutes for you guys to ask questions of how they got there, how did they come up with a compromise, did it make some sense, and challenge these folks. So let's have some fun. Now I got to figure out how to work these slides. So here's our fact pattern. And by the way, I purposely kept the economic numbers out of this because we just don't have time to get into all of those details, but there's enough detail to be able to argue the main arguments that will be necessary. So we have a U.S. multinational with global operations. It's involved in the design, manufacture, and marketing strategy of various lines of consumer apparel products. The U.S. multinationals has various distributors around the world, and they are structured as limited risk distributors. The manufacture of its products are largely in China and other Asian jurisdictions. The China manufacture and I think we're going to change this a little bit, will be a related party and an unrelated party, while other manufacturers are third parties. All sourcing for China and Asia manufacture is done through a Hong Kong sourcing affiliate who acts as a principal rather than a pure sourcing agent and buying agent. In this respect, it is assumed that the Hong Kong affiliate complies with the substantial contribution rules under Section 954. All manufacturing operations are, again, third parties, with the exception that there is one manufacturer in China that's a related party. The three-country map was initiated involving the United States, Canada, and China, and they're here to negotiate the following disputes. The first issue is the characterization of the distribution operations as limited risk distributors. This is because the risk and functional profile understood by CRA and SAT does not comport with their view of a limited risk distributor. The targeted operating margin for these limited risk distributors is 3%. There may be a concern that China's related contract manufacturing may be of interest to SAT, particularly for the limited risk operation characterization. That's a specific issue that one will have to deal with. The comparable set for China distribution and manufacturing consists of a pan-Asian comparable firms for China, North America, and firms for Canada. The search criteria, though, is limited solely to limited risk and private companies. Among the factors considered are the marketing of the product in the local jurisdiction and the perceived uniqueness of the market. Advertising, marketing, and promotion costs incurred by each distributor in China and in Canada. the level of support or lack thereof of marketing and promotion subsidies provided to Canada and China by the U.S. multinational, the lack of precision and detail in the distribution agreement. The functions provided specifically are on site in Canada and China by brand managers and merchandisers. And whether China's distribution and manufacturing operations can be considered integrated as one operation. All of this calls into issue whether the Chinese and Canadian affiliates create a local marketing intangible for their respective operations. If China and Canada are successful with the LRD challenge, what is the appropriate transfer pricing method and profit level indicator? Is a profit split method appropriate or a range of operating profit under the TNMM approach? Does a successful challenge require a new comparable search? I have trouble working with these. Because Canada is a contiguous country, many management back office functions are charged to Canada, so we have service fees. They include legal, financial reporting, compliance, IT, logistics, customs compliance, and certain marketing and SG&A costs and general management services in support of the Canadian management team. This will be specifically for the Canadian team. CRA is challenging these services in both the benefits test and the appropriate markup. So let's get started. Again, each team has 15 minutes. The U.S. has 20 minutes because the U.S. Is arguing to 3 countries where the others may be arguing to one or two. Then we're going to, as we said, the country tax authorities will synthesize these arguments and deliberate, over a 30-minute time. So we will hear you guys argue out these views among yourselves. We'll take 5 minutes to deliberate, and then we'll give you the findings. And everybody here can comment, criticize, say what you think. In terms of the resolution. So let's get started. So why don't we start first with Liz, and you will be arguing to Shanwu and Steve and Dale.
Okay, good morning, gentlemen. And, I apologize, I've taken a little artistic license with our scenario to give it a bit of color. So this morning I'm representing Luluberry US in regard to its map request that relates to all 3 of your countries. Luluberry is the parent of a multinational group. They are a consumer apparel manufacturer, primarily athletic wear that was initially popular among the urban millennial consumers, but has now found a much wider market. We are today talking about adjustments to Luluberry's Chinese distributor, Lulu China, and its Canadian distribution affiliate, Lulu Canada. We have adjustments, as we've reviewed, relating to whether those distributors are truly limited risk distributors, and then also support services, back-off support services that are rendered from the U.S. to Canada. So, Luluberry stands by the pricing of its intercompany transactions, and I hope that, I'm able to provide you with enough information to, support that position today. To give you a little background on our business, it was launched in the U.S. in the early 2000s. We expanded outside the U.S. In and after 2012. Started in Canada and Europe and expanded to China and Japan. The adjustments that are the subject of our map request relate to 2014. Luluberry US is a full-fledged entrepreneurial company. The activities in the US include product design. We have a very mature research and development group. They have come up with some innovative materials design work. So they have patented some odor-resistant fabrics, new weaving processes that reduce wastage. There's a lot of activity in research and development in the U.S. More relevant to this case, they have a huge strategic marketing department that manages all the worldwide marketing strategy. Much of Luluberry's marketing happens through social media, and the social media campaigns are all devised in the United States by the strategic marketing group, and to a large extent implemented from there. They also design and operate Luluberry's website, which of course, allows consumers to shop, but it contributes greatly to brand development because there are a lot of social fora where Luluberry customers can interact with one another and learn about the brand and learn about fitness and lifestyle events in their local areas. Also in the U.S., Luluberry operates its own brand retail stores and distributes some products to third-party retailers. So Lulu China and Lulu Canada are distributors. They distribute our products in their respective countries where they are sold exclusively by third-party retailers. Our position is that they perform only routine distribution functions, and contractually their risks are very limited. They have no currency risk, no credit risk, no inventory risk. They are limited risk distributors. And our transfer pricing studies have determined that a 3% operating margin is consistent and appropriate with their functions, assets, and risks.
So, can I ask a question? You said that in the U.S. you use social media.
I get the microphone, yeah.
Okay. So in the U.S. you said the strategic marketing department use social media as a marketing tool. And what kind of social media?
We have a Facebook page, we have a Twitter feed, there's an Instagram page, all kinds of social media really. Whenever a new app or new form of social media, starts to become popular, we try to push content through that channel.
Okay, the reason I ask this question is that all these social media, apps, service, Facebook, Twitter, they are banned in China. So they don't have, the service in China.
Yeah.
But they have WeChat.
Yeah, they have WeChat. Yes.
Yes. I mean, there are many apps that are not accessible in China, but there are other apps that are.
Okay.
Can I also expand on that question there? I was just looking at your R&D and innovative material you're referring to. As a individual is very familiar with Under Armour, Nike, Adidas, it's my understanding that all the materials is same and similar in that industry and all prepared and made in China. Can you expand on how much that material is actually different than from the Under Armour material or the Nike material?
Well, our U.S. R&D group has developed some new materials manufacturing processes. So, I cannot speak to Under Armour or Nike because, I don't know specifically how their materials are prepared, but I can tell you that we have obtained patents on some of our materials manufacturing processes.
Oh, by the way, I'm a user of Lululemon Berry too.
Luluberry.
I was gonna call the question whether you're a user of Under Armour and Adidas. And, since I myself hadn't spent a whole lot of time with them, I didn't think you had either.
Tommy John underwear.
So any resemblance to any real life company is purely coincidental.
Let me see if I can say, I know that Mark had said that we were going to be arguing. That's not really my role here. I'm not going to be arguing with you. Oh,
Yeah. There you go.
that's better. Yeah? No? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so, I mean, I don't see particularly the role U.S. Competent Authority, that you may not entirely enjoy this, but we are your friend and your representative here. I want nothing more on these issues to support you 100%. So let's
defend the U.S.
No,
citizen.
let me clarify, I'm your friend too. I'm the Canadian Competent Authority.
no, he's just friendly. Yeah.
And you notice Shanwu didn't say anything.
Well, I'm not your enemy. So.
Yeah.
Remember, a job of the Canadian Competent Authority, the Chinese Competent Authority, the U.S. Competent Authority, is to resolve double taxation. That's the #1 issue here. So ideally, we should all be on the same page in the negotiations inside the room. We may throw erasers at each other during negotiations, but at the end of the day, you need double tax relief. So that's what all these points will come up.
I'm going to remind you about that a little later in the hour. But for right now, I mean, clearly the role of the U.S. is we'd like to support the structure that you've I would love to dig into your Hong Kong structure. You know what you know, how much is that principal structure there? But for this particular purpose, I have one job that has been pointed out: resolve double tax. But at least the U.S. approach would be, we'd like it to be the adjustments raised in those other two countries to go away, which I take it. And I guess one thing we always ask the company is, what do you think ought to happen here? And, do you still feel, after these adjustments have been raised, do you still feel good about your LRD structure and your manufacturing? Or in this process, have you decided, well, maybe there's something else that might be a better, more appropriate outcome?
No, I would say we still feel really good about our LRD structure. We think that genuinely, these are not risk-bearing entities. We've chosen a comparable set. Based on our comparable set, we came up with a 3% operating margin. One can always quibble about the comparable set. It is our comparable sets are regional rather than jurisdiction specific. So,
and as a taxpayer, it's kind of hard for you to care a whole lot about the comparable sets. We have a lot of internal experience. Let's talk more about the structural parts of this, because that's really what your answers can influence here. And the first one would be, okay, focusing on the distribution side, what is it that you think sets your product apart? Why is it saleable in Canada? Why is it saleable in China? And one question I wanted to come back to on the Twitter, or whatever is available in China, what's the message? And I'm trying to draw a distinction between what I heard early on when you said a lot of the very strategic decisions that are have been made in the U.S. Are those the decisions that are making the difference in those countries, or is it some of the marketing approaches in those countries? We've got to answer that before we can come to a conclusion.
The marketing approach is set in the U.S. For all countries worldwide. Blueberry is very important to the company to control its message and ensure that message is consistent across the world. I mean, I think because so much of their marketing is based on social media, and because so much of their market is millennials, they're on social media all the time. So one false step by someone in a local country can reverberate across the world. I mean, I think United's brand took quite a dive last week, and that was one incident by one employee in one location, and somebody had a cell phone. So they're very, the company is very conscious of that, and for that reason, they control, all the decision making happens in the United States. I mean, there is on-the-ground implementation to the extent there has to be, but, our approach is, the brains are all in the U.S.
Just to add, when you're making your competent authority request, the things you should include in your competent authority request, so the three competent authorities can see it, is one of the primary things in competent authority is the consistency from year to year and how you treat your company. In this particular situation, you're calling a limited risk distributor. I would just like you to add a comment in your competent authority request when it's filed, how you addressed your company in 08, 09, 010 when there was a downturn in the economy, whether your company showed a 3% profit or did they have any losses in those particular years.
Well, we didn't enter the Canadian and Chinese markets until 2012, but that was, a ramping up period. So, profit-wise, on a net basis, the chain made a loss, but those companies were profitable in those years. Their compensation is structured to maintain that limited, consistent with that limited risk structure.
The reason I'm here is because the U.S. Competent Authority invited me to be here, but I'm not sure I should be here. Can you tell me what kind of a transaction is going on between the U.S. and China? Is there a direct transaction, between U.S. and China, or as far as I understand, the Chinese manufacturer is selling to the Hong Kong principal, and the Hong Kong principal is selling back to the Chinese distributor. There's no direct transaction between the U.S. and China. So why I'm here sitting and arguing with Steve?
But before she speaks, I can maybe shed some light on that, on why I invited you here. At least in the U.S., we have a commitment to, basically honor the structure of the transactions. And if it doesn't make economic sense, then basically we can't respect it. But in this case, we're talking about a situation where a global structure for distribution is separate from the manufacturing, and there is no particular reason that we can see that we'd start off by treating them as one combined entity in China. I can understand the attraction, but under the rules, I think we've got a big obstacle in getting there.
Okay, out of the respect to the U.S. competent authorities, so we can do a taxpayer a favor, by sitting here and discuss the case.
I think you guys got it.
Oh, I'm up?
Oh, no, Mike?
Okay.
No, it's, listen, if you finished, you have 5 more minutes. If you finished your presentation,
Oh,
frankly, I don't know that you answered the question.
Yeah, you have a couple of more areas that.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask one more question. Since the company didn't start in 2012 in Canada, can you also include the growth in sales from 2012 to 2014 and how, whether it's been a slow and gradual approach or has been a spike in the sales? Include that in your competent authority request, that's all.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
We'll
since,
do that.
yeah. I'm just trying, the other issues on the table will be a little bit different with each country. Both of them have the distribution issue, but Canada has a question regarding the services, and believe me, this is a really old issue with Canada. I don't think I need a whole lot from you, but are you basically of the impression that if you didn't provide those services to the Canadian entity, that they would have to spend their own money to go out and provide the same?
Yeah, they'd either have to hire people to do them in-house, or they would have to outsource it. So, I mean, the U.S. General Counsel's office reviews contracts and, provides guidance. So they would have to hire outside counsel or hire their own general counsel. There are various back office support services. So there's, we think it's very clear that a benefit has been conferred. They're not duplicating local functions. So it's not a shareholder service.
Okay.
It should be compensable.
Okay, and China's gonna have an issue regarding manufacturing, either separately or combined. And so the question there, question I have there is, when you're deciding to locate manufacturing, it sounds like you have some third-party manufacturing, and then you have some controlled manufacturing. So what drove the controlled manufacturing decision, and how close is it in structure and compensation to the third-party manufacturing contracts?
We try to model all of our, because our manufacturers, whether they're related or unrelated, they're performing essentially the same functions. We try to, from a transfer pricing perspective, have a very consistent policy worldwide. So, structurally, we're compensating them in the same manner. In terms of deciding whether we will use an unrelated manufacturer or a controlled manufacturer, typically we try to use third-party contract manufacturers. In some situations, the considerations particular to a jurisdiction and its laws and facts and circumstances, we may need to enter into a joint venture with a local company or use an affiliate.
But I've often seen, particularly in apparel, an argument raised that, well, we would like to use third party for everything, but we get a better deal on third party if we have the ability to self-produce as well. And so that is one reason that we have it.
Well, Steve,
Please.
a lot of companies, they try to, manage, control their supply chain in China because, China is a big country, and also, the protection of IP in China is not that good. You understand that, right? And so, I mean, if you use third parties, you have to, deliver your design, to third parties, and companies, taxpayers may have concern that those proprietary information may relate to the third parties, and I think it makes sense, for the companies to have their own, manufacturing in China.
I'm just going to interject here for a minute because the facts were modified a bit. But the question I think that, Liz, you should address is the transaction with China. And if you're assuming that the Hong Kong principal will be making the sale, then the Chinese distributor will have the use of the trademark. So there's a transaction there. If you're assuming that the Hong Kong distributor will be selling on behalf of the U.S. company, then you have a transaction. So maybe you can address what you think the China transaction would be so that we can bring Shanwu into the fold here.
Because the local distributor is selling something with Luluberry's brand on it, there is an agreement between the Chinese distributor and the U.S. parent that enables them to make sales of a product that bears the brand. So it is a sort of a license and distribution agreement.
So the license is to the Hong Kong principal or to the Chinese distributor? Can you clarify that?
Which one would you like it to be, Marc?
I think the license has to come from the licensor, which is the U.S. company. I think you're giving.
Right.
I think you're giving
And not
too
a
much.
sub-license?
I think you're giving too much credit to a principal in Hong Kong.
Okay.
And I think Imke will take that up when she starts to argue.
Yeah, it's still not clear to me, who's the licensee? Is it Hong Kong principal or is the Chinese?
The licensee would be the Chinese distributor.
Okay, then. Okay.
Okay, all right.
So let's move on to Canada because we'll save Imke to really wrap this all up. So Mike, you can take on both Dale and Steve. You got 15 minutes.
Dale, I've known you a long time. We play hockey together every Monday night, and I drink at your bar, so I'm not going to waste your time and try to pull the wool over your eyes with all
Who pays
sorts
for the
of
drinks?
that is a very sensitive issue in Canada. I assume it is in the United States as well, but as you know, this matter was assessed by some rogue field auditor. The audit was terrible, and you've seen the file. I'm a bit frustrated with the whole situation.
I like this guy.
And we objected to this. The appeals officer, dumb as a bag of hammers, but was amenable to holding this in abeyance until you can go sort this out with your colleagues in the U.S. and China. And the instructions I'm getting from the U.S. parent are pretty clear. It's like, look, we don't mind paying Canadian tax, but we really don't want to. We got a whole bunch of shelter and R&D credits in the States in that, so I'm going to be very blunt with you, Dale. I think I'm going to go right to the end of this. We can get the easy stuff out of the way first. I'm going to try to bang you over the head, physically and literally, about the ridiculous position you guys have had since the 1990s on marketing intangibles, which is complete fantasy under Canadian law. And you're going to say to me, we're not changing our position for you guys. I've heard you say this many times, but I will convince you on the facts, because the facts are very clear, that when the smoke clears, there's not a whole lot of value going on here. All we have are a bunch of hosers running around, flogging stuff, that at the end of the day, when this agreement is terminated, there's no value in Canada. So I'm going to get to that point in the beginning. But let's get the easy step out of the way first. Let's deal with the services. So, as you know, there's a bunch of bundle services that are being provided by the U.S. parent. legal services. We have very incompetent lawyers in Canada generally, and so it's really important that those be done by that. Same with the accountants, the tax consultants, and the IT people. So you're not gonna have any issue with that.
Mike, you joined the club of the outspoken too.
I will concede though, because I don't want to waste your time, that there's a bunch of shareholder type stewardship and the like costs, and that, you know, since the Earth's crust began to cool, I've been born Canada's view about shareholder, not in Canada. And so, for the purposes of facilitating a civilized discussion with you for the next 12 and a half minutes, I'm going to concede those now. But I want you to bear that in mind and think about that when we come to talking about the value of what's actually being done here and what you take to the black box that you and your American and Chinese counterpart are going to enter very shortly. So having said that, let's just get that out of the way. I think that's uncontroversial, and I think if you suggest that it is, then we can go back and go through chapter and verse this again, but I don't think we're going to have to do that. So unless you have any sort of questions on that, I wouldn't mind getting into the really interesting, or at least I find interesting, dispute that we're going to have about the marketing intangible.
Michael, your comments are well taken, but let's just take a step back here and just want you to realize you're speaking to the Canadian Competent Authority here, and you're here because I provide you a service. You're not honorary going to get a service, so I strongly suggest you start showing a little bit of respect. If you want me to represent you in front of the U.S. Competent Authority to relieve double taxation, I will work towards making sure double taxation is relieved and making sure the arm's length principle is followed during the negotiation process. Unfortunately, it is a black box which is outside of my bailiwick of those decisions, and when that decision is made, I will give you the end result. However, I'm really looking forward to your discussion on the marketing intangibles, sir.
All right, so I had to write some notes down because I have a very short memory, largely because of all the beer I drink in your bar.
Michael, with all due regard, I'm thinking, I still have a few, I don't have any questions of you, I'm still gonna have some questions of Dale when we get around to the services. Like I said, this is a really old story back and forth between the US and Canada.
Now, I want to point out, your questions are relating to an audit that was done in the field. It's now within competent authority, and I prepare a position paper to go to the competent authority of the US. So your arguments will be well taken into consideration before I discuss with the IRS. You are the IRS, Steve. So.
Thank you, Bill. All right, so this marketing intangible, the field auditor has alleged was created by my hosers running around Saskatchewan. This view is rooted, in this CRA circular that I believe you co-authored in 1987 or 88, or was it 89?
97.
No, this goes back further than that.
No.
But there's this concept that has been bubbling around the U.S. since the late 60s, and in 94, things happened, and this idea of marketing intangible, and we can go through that. That this kind of activity done basically represents some accretion of value that should be enjoyed by the Canadian taxpayer in these circumstances. I'm going to put to you 3 reasons why I think fundamentally that's wrong. First one is, and this is one that is so utterly obvious, I've been astounded for years why the Americans have taken this approach, is that as a matter of law, the intangible is nothing. There's no, under civil law, under common law, under intellectual property statutory law, the activities that the intangible was created by all these guys running around, those activities do not create something that's defensible. There's no patent regime, there's no trademark regime that comes from this, it's just a bunch of stuff these intangibles are talking about. The only thing that might happen is that the distributor might actually sell some more stuff. Well, it gets rewarded that way because it sells more stuff, makes a bit more margin, 3% in our case, the operating margin, we can carry on that way. It is, I want to reemphasize, it is a made-up concept. One might say, well, I mean, yes, I agree, as a matter of law, there is nothing defensible here. There's no bundle of rights being created by all this activity. But, wait a minute, economically, though, there could be something there. Well, I've heard this before, and I've actually canvassed rooms of very smart people. That's most rooms I'm in, all smarter than me. But the economists, these very smart people who think about these things really hard, tend to be split in the issue. Some people think it is, some people think they don't. They kind of dither on it. And so I've never heard anything convincing that as a matter of economic theory that marketing intangibles actually developed by this kind of activity. And I guess to take that a step further, as you know in Canada, the concept there might be some general economic accretion by activity is meaningless under the tax law, because as Shell Canada and the Supreme Court said, and we've been beat over the head many times, physically and literally since then, is that economic realities just don't matter. It's what matters is a matter of legal substance, and when you don't have anything under common law, civil law, or one province that actually has an Napoleonic code in it, you know that, and of course the statutory law that's layered on top of that, there's nothing there that's created, so there's nothing to which value should be attributed. So that's the first point. The second point really goes to how do you, and even if there is, I'll spot you that. And I know you're not going to change the CRA's policy, you're not going to rewrite the circular for me, but I think, and this is kind of where I want to go with this, is that how do you value that? Now, that's a fair question, right? We have a situation where it's, the agreement's silent on exclusivity, for example. Well, what does the marketing spend do? Well, it benefits the subsidiary, but it also benefits other distributors that Luluberry has at arm's length, right? And so, I think there it's fair to say, well, how do you value it? The other part of this, of course, is what happens if this distribution agreement is terminated? Is Lulu Canada, are they going to get a fee of any kind? Well, the agreement's silent on that. So there's no compensation being paid on termination for these intangible rights. Well, then there's no value there, I would say. I mean, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I'd say even if they had negotiated a termination payment, the most those would ever be worth is what you get on that kind of liquidation basis or a termination basis. So I think the second point is that even if I'm wrong, you're going to say I'm wrong, and I've been wrong many times in my life, even though I really am tripping over this ability to defend a made-up fantasy thing. I think that there really isn't much value there. And I would put to you another example that might convince you, or might convince your competent authority colleagues, is to take a look at what happens in the pharmaceutical industry. So in Canada and most other countries, you have a patented regime. The patents expire, die 17, 20 years, depending on where you are, 25. And immediately after that, all the generic folks leap in like a fat kid on Smarties on this thing, and the patent holder's market share typically drops sharply. And I'm sure you've seen that frequently in your practice. I mean, especially
Fat kid on a Smartie or what?
Oh.
Just checking. Just not sure what you're referring to.
But I think that kind of underscores or reinforces the point. There isn't a whole lot of value there to this whatever intangible we might point to economically as intangible. And the last point I want to make is that I think as a practical matter, this concept is incompatible with the arm's length principle generally. I mean, it kind of, to me, it beggars belief that someone like Chanel, for example, is going to share the upside and the benefit of the increase in value of their intangibles with some bunch of guys wearing toques in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. I think that, I suspect that's not going to be the case. And I think if you go and you tear apart the very sophisticated economists, tear apart the financial statements of these companies, I think you'll see that. They're not sharing that reward with their distributors on an arm's length basis. And as you know, I do have a piece of a Chinese business that's distributing luxury apparel in China, right?
Is this a sales pitch now?
No, I did.
Just checking.
And in that distribution agreement, I showed the draft agreement. We were in the bar last week. I mean, in that agreement, we have a marketing spend. There's no required marketing spend. If we spend it, other people get it. And there's certainly whatever those guys do back up home, they're not sharing any of that benefit with me. So I think, again, to suggest that arm's length third parties would have this kind of arrangement, I'm not convinced by that. I'm not logically convinced by that. The experts that we engage to create sophisticated and very expensive comparable sets have not been able to point to this. And so where I'm driving with all this is, because I know you're going to go back and you're going to say, look, we're not changing your policy for you, but trying to say like this, coupled the fact there's no inventory risk, no currency risk, that there's not a whole lot of value should be attributed to that. And so, you know, if you have to go in that room and come, you know, to a common type of approach in terms of analytical, like operating margin ratio, PRE ratio, whatever you use, I really would think that the right answer here is to go in the lower end of that range. And I think that's something we could probably be comfortable with.
Are you done, Michael?
Okay, you guys got.
It depends what you say.
About 3 minutes for the US and they all,
Maybe.
Canada to ask your question.
Okay, really appreciate you taking your time in to come into the Canadian Competent Authority and present your case. What I would like you to do is, I understand all your comments. I would like you to take some comments I'm going to make back and rejig your competent authority request before you send it in, before I file up a position paper to the U.S. competent authority. So
You want that in writing, right?
absolutely, yes, please. I wouldn't start with the point that intangibles are nothing. Everybody has different views on what an intangible is. And one of the points I want to make, we're dealing with the apparel industry here versus, I'm not sure a good comparison would be the pharma industry. However, when you take into consideration that is one thing I'm unaware, was there any royalties paid by Canada to the U.S. at all? I mean, if you're unaware, no royalties. So there's no value added to this apparel side. There's no branding coming into Canada. There's no assistance in the sales function at all by having a royalty being paid. Because we're dealing with an apparel industry. Are we taking no-name clothes? My understanding it's Lulu, Berry clothes. Wouldn't there normally be, if there was any value to that, there would normally be a royalty being paid. And if there is no value coming in from Canada, that's going to require substantial more sales effort. That wouldn't need to be done if there was a royalty being paid. I just want you to take that away and think about it. So I'm going to have that discussion with the U.S. competent authority in the future. Also, your comments about legal substance doesn't matter, is all that matters, and it's not economic substance. I would ask you to go back to the drawing board a little bit and just read a little bit of the BEPS stuff that's come out in the last little while, and read about value creation and where the value is and where the assets, where the functions that are being performed that are generating the value associated to this. I'd also like, in my reading of the facts that I have so far, there is little information on any distribution agreement, which leads me to believe that Canada was left on their own to develop their own marketing plan, and there was very little marketing guidance that was ever given to Canada relating to developing and obtaining new customers. So if you could just address into the future how I would deal with the IRS when I bring to the table that Canada has either increased their sales from 2012 to 2014 through what marketing efforts that were made. My understanding right now is that very little systems was ever provided by the US, so that leads me to believe that the Canadian company was leaning towards the entrepreneurial side of the business versus a limited risk side of the business. However, I do appreciate your understanding, and I thank you for understanding that the operating margin approach for a distributor is generally the normal way you would go about trying to resolve this. And the 3% happens to be on the low end of the range. However, I will step back and probably pull out another set of comparables that would put more of an entrepreneurial set of comps in versus a limited risk comps. Because my understanding in my 400 plus cases negotiating with the IRS competent authority, that they're very, very seldom settle any case at a limited risk distributor, even though Canada is the tested party. So when you're looking at it from that perspective, there is flexibility, because ultimately my end goal here is to try to make sure we end up resolving double tax going forward. I understand also, based on yesterday, you're going to have a 15% tax rate. You're probably going to want more revenue down in the U.S. in the future. So we're going to have to address, because even though competent authority is not precedent setting from year to year, we understand how it plays a role in the future negotiations. Also, I'd like to point out the costs. You brought up the services, and I'm not sure where the auditor has come to the table when you were doing the audit with the auditor in the field. There is markups. I understand there's certain costs. If they're providing an enduring benefit to Canada, that even though they were expensed in the US, I'm of the belief that certain costs should be allowed in Canada if they're providing a benefit. Whether they're subject to a markup or not is a different question. Generally, lawyer and accounting services add no future value, so we don't generally add up any value, so we generally don't allow much of a markup for, lawyer and accounting stuff. However, for marketing efforts and IT services, anything that has an enduring benefit that after you provide, we allow, in Canada, we generally would negotiate some sort of markup in that aspect. However, every case obviously is a package when you're rolling into the competent authority, and you've got to understand that when you're negotiating a case, it is a case-by-case basis. However, you have to look at the big picture too when you're looking at negotiating all your cases.
Thank you, Dale. Address all those.
Before we move to China, Steve, do you have any comments from the US side?
Yeah, I do. As I said, the services I think we're good on. With regard to distribution, I guess, what I'm hearing Dale try and paint here is a picture where, you have a product that's just there, and then Canada takes it and turns it into this wonderful, product brand in Canada. I get that, Brady. Yeah. But I guess, the deal is, there is a brand here. The fact that there's not a lot of detail in the distribution agreement is, I think, something to consider, but bottom line is we see the, support that's coming from the U.S. From social media, the branding. Now, I'm not sure whether that's, in this case, whether that's either a separate royalty or an embedded royalty, but all that is in before it gets to Canada, and it's my understanding that basically Canada is more in the position of taking direction about how you distribute in keeping with the more strategic approach, marketing approach that the U.S. has already made available.
Yes, it's fair to say you're just a puppet of the U.S.
I know the issue. Yeah.
All right, let's turn to China, and Imke, you and Shanwu have the stage, so this will be interesting. You have a combination of a lot of new thoughts.
Imke, before we start, can I just make a few comments? I said let's first pretend Steve is not here, and I said in the beginning. I said in the beginning that we are not your enemy. Actually, we are friends, because my real enemy is the U.S. Competent Authority, and I understand that no matter how much tax you pay in China, the company can get a credit in the U.S. Right? Probably from your perspective, you want more profits in China, because more profits in China, more work for you, right? So we are friends, and I hope you understand that.
And they're currency manipulator, but yeah.
By the way, just so you know, that friend comment always happens in a competent authority negotiation in the black box.
Yeah, it does.
But let's see if we're still friends after we finish this.
Well, okay, having heard that, I sort of disagree, so I would like to, go into the details also on the Asian market. And before we go into the details of the Asian distributor, of the Chinese distributor, I would like to shed a little bit of more light on the Hong Kong principle and the functions of the Hong Kong principle, and the substance, especially of the Hong Kong principle, because I can see it in your eyes that you just simply want to disregard it and have a tested party and basically apply a profit split. So I would like to explain to you why this all doesn't work. So the Hong Kong principle has roughly 50 to 60 employees that go around the Asian market and go to the manufacturing entities, related and unrelated manufacturing entities, and perform substantial quality control activities. They are the ones that are responsible for going into the factories, doing surprise visits, checking that all the badges are correct, sending back apparel that has been produced with little flaws or that have not been made to specification. So they are actually the people that have the value add to this whole enterprise, because they are the ones that have the control of the quality which makes up the brand. Likewise, they also come up, they have some sort of you might call it R&D function, so they come up with additional designs that might be good for the Asian market or might be better for the Canadian market. And get this to the US company and tell them, look, this is what we could do, and then the US company gets the design and the trademark of that, and then basically licenses back to the manufacturers or to the distributors. So what you have in Hong Kong is really a company with a lot of substance and with a lot of value add. If you look to the Chinese company, which basically tells you that we really have to separate the two functions of the Chinese company. So one is a contract manufacturing activity, and the other one is a distribution activity. On the contract manufacturing side, the Chinese entity is very much under the control of the Hong Kong entity. So the Chinese entity cannot really decide anything on its own. If they want to implement a production process, they need to get feedback from the Hong Kong entity to actually get approval to do it the way they want to do it, because the Hong Kong entity needs to make sure that the quality actually really comes up to par. On the distribution activity, it's the function and risk profile of the Chinese entity is very much like a plain vanilla limited risk distributor. We don't have any material stock or inventory. We don't have any material pricing risk, not at all. Pricing is set by the US company and basically given to the Chinese entity to allow a uniform pricing across the markets, to basically keep the value of the brand up, because the least thing you want to have is some price dumping in China and thereby devaluing your brand. So that is something that the Chinese entity has no impact on and no influence on. Likewise, the Chinese entity basically gets the products, and all strategic marketing is done by the US entity, which brings me a little bit to your favorite topic, the marketing intangibles. So if we look at the functions of the Chinese entity, and you mentioned that we have a very high AMP spend, and you mentioned that we have brand managers and merchandisers in the Chinese entity, which in your opinion would trigger a marketing intangible. I would like to point out the fact that if you look at the AMP expenses, you will need to differentiate between those AMP expenses that are actually really brand building and really enhance the value of the brand as such, and those AMP expenses that are actually made by the distributor on the local market and would have been made by any other distributor as well. So you look into, and I'm not going into the argument of my Canadian colleague here, because I know that China really doesn't believe in some sort of legal basis. So irrespective of whether the Chinese law has a legal basis for marketing intangibles, if you look at, and that is in line with the BEPS proposals, if you look at what is an intangible, anything of value, you would naturally look at what is actually the activity that creates the value, and then the value, what is the value that is being created. And the brand manager, the responsibility of the brand manager is to develop, implement, and execute local marketing initiatives, and taking into consideration the local market. So anything the brand manager does is confined to the Chinese market and has no impact on any sort of the brand in general, but only on the local market. And to the merchandiser, the role of the merchandiser is to come up with certain measures like seasonal sales, something that would be normal on the Chinese market to have, like, I don't know, a cherry blossom sale or something like that. Something you wouldn't have in the US, and the US probably wouldn't know how to implement this because they don't have the knowledge of the market. However, when it comes to brand building marketing and brand building expenses, like hiring a celebrity testimonial for the brand, like Serena Williams, which has just been hired to represent the company, which is very well known not only in the North American market, but also on the Chinese market, and other testimonials that are very well known and represent the brand. This is all undertaken by the US entity without any involvement of the Chinese entity. So they have not even one single iota to say when it comes to which celebrity is being chosen. They might be consulted by the US entity, and they might weigh in with their thoughts, but that's pretty much it. And all the costs are being borne by the US entity and not being charged on to the Chinese entity. And when you look at the development of the company, we entered the market in 2012. So when we built up the market in 2012, the US company gave the Chinese entity respective market support payments, because no limited risk distributor would really create the market and develop the market on its own dime. So there was a market support payment being made by the US entity, which ensured that the China distributor was on a 3% operating margin from inception and always was profitable. So right now, the company is profitable. There's no reason for additional market support payments. The market has been developed on the dime of the US entity, and therefore there's nothing that needs to be compensated on the Chinese end, because there's nothing being done right now that should be compensated. The market is already more or less developed. And when we look at the comparable set, I know that the Chinese would like to throw out our private companies and go on and only look at public companies. That would be a flaw and would actually give you a complete distorted range of operating margins. Because first of all, the public companies tend to be more cluttered in terms of activities, business lines, and functions and risks. So to actually really find public companies where you can really find only a distributor, that is a stretch, especially if you only go onto the Chinese market and limit your search to the Chinese territory. So that is why we expanded the whole thing to the Pan-Asian search, because the Chinese market is just simply too small to give us a reliable set of comparables. And also we looked at private companies because in the apparel industry, it is still basically the norm that those companies are held privately and are not public companies. So you would, especially when it comes to distributors, you have a much bigger range of distributors when you look into the private companies versus the public companies. So you would limit yourself to a set which would not really reflect the true margin that this limited distributor should be earning. And let me think if I forgot something. Oh, value chain analysis, right. For the same reason why I said that the profit split method should not be applicable, because we have two distinct business lines. For the same reason, a value chain analysis doesn't get you anywhere. The Chinese entity has no value add. All DEMPI functions are actually really exercised in Hong Kong and in the US. So when you look at the IP, which is held and developed in the US and partly in Hong Kong, which is being remunerated, those DEMPI functions are all in Hong Kong and in the US. China is a mere, and I repeat my Canadian colleague here, is a mere puppet. So we just simply do whatever Hong Kong and the US tells us, and this is what we do. So even if you went into a value chain analysis, it really wouldn't get you anywhere because there are no value drivers in China. And then let me see. Yeah, no, that's actually, I'm done.
Okay. Thank you, Imke. I think you have done a wonderful job in advocating, on behalf of the taxpayers. Is that true? Is my understanding right that you said the value is created in Hong Kong and in the US?
Mainly in the US, but also in Hong Kong, obviously, because Hong Kong is the company that is securing and guaranteeing the quality of the product, which is a part of the brand.
Okay, so we both know that, in China you have a manufacturer and you have a distributor, right? So we, the auditors, have inspect the books of both the manufacturer and the distributor, and we know the price difference. So we know how much profit is stashed in Hong Kong, and we also know that the company took a position that
Stashed in Hong Kong, it is earned in Hong Kong, right? Okay. So it's not stashed.
So how much tax you pay? How much tax you pay in Hong Kong? Because we know that you take a position that in Hong Kong all the sales the income is not sourced from Hong Kong, therefore you don't pay tax in Hong Kong. And you said the value is created in Hong Kong, but you don't pay tax in Hong Kong. And all the BEPS discussion is about the alignment of the value creation with taxation. And
Blame Hong Kong. That's not our problem. I absolutely invite you to join us and meet or see our facilities in Hong Kong, and you will see the 50 people that are working there and walking around. So just because there is no taxation, that does not mean that value creation has to be shifted to another country. It is in line, we have the substance and we have the functions in that respective country, and we also have the knowledge and the know-how in the respective country.
Well, I don't know, how Steve you feel about that. But if the
Yeah, I
US
feel it.
is not going to do something about that, China is going to do something.
Well, I guess
US is going to tax it anyway,
to be honest, this lays bare one of the issues from BEPS. As the U.S., I'm sitting here going, well, let me see. Yes, I'm very interested in Hong Kong.
Mhm.
That's not part of our discussion really here today. That's really between the US and its taxpayer and how much of that is there. It doesn't, just because there is some concern that Hong Kong may or may not deserve to earn as much as it does. Clearly something's earned there. The question is how much. But it does not necessarily fall, in fact it doesn't fall, that anything, that any concern that any overage earned in Hong Kong would fall to either China or to Canada.
Agreed.
It would be to the US, and frankly, it's not a big part of the discussion here.
Can I, Imke, you just said that there are 50 people in Hong Kong, right, in the Hong Kong company. Do you know how many people work in the manufacturing entities and also the distribution entity in China?
Well, obviously more, but that doesn't mean that the value is created there. That is, I mean, and I know where you're going. I mean, you want to see our CBC, and then you want to see how many employees we have in the various countries and say, ooh, this is where the value is created. That's not true. Just because, I mean, one very highly skilled person can create more value in a supply chain than 100 people that do nothing else but stitching. So that's not value creation.
Okay, I just threw out the facts, you know, and also the U.S. Counsel just said to us that in the U.S. the marketing tool is the social media, and as I said, all the tools used by the U.S. is not accessible in China. So I assume that the Chinese brand managers, marketing people in China has to play a very, very important role.
Fair point, fair point.
In marketing.
Your assumption is wrong. So just because China does not have the access to social media as any other country would have for whatever reason. So this was a reason why we had to revert to other marketing methodologies. And so in China, obviously, social media is not really our prime marketing tool. But the US has come up with other marketing tools that serve the Chinese market specifically, and that deviate from what would normally be on the North American market, and that has been developed by China. By the US and not by China. So the brand managers and the merchandisers, they are really for the local. The merchandiser goes to the respective retailers and says, look, we would like to have a sale, and we can maybe offer you some, good deal if you actually really have a sale and sell 2 for 1 or something like that. So that is what is being done in China, which is purely local market. I mean, North America couldn't care less if there's a sale in China.
I don't think that's the fact. The fact is that the company used the Chinese version of the social media to target the young generations. And they use the Chinese Weibo, Chinese WeChat, all the local version of the social media, right? So, that's all done by the Chinese marketing team.
No, that's all done by the US.
Okay, we have our auditors, they have done due diligence. So.
All right, guys, we got to try to keep this on some form of schedule here. So we wrapped up our presentations here. So the next 15 minutes, if we can, for you guys the 3 competent authorities to argue among each other, take a couple minutes and come up with a conclusion, and pick a spokesperson to say what the conclusion is to the audience, and we'll try to get some questions.
So, do you want us to have our bit of conversation?
Well, right now you can argue among yourselves.
I would like to argue among ourselves.
Well, you got
That's what we
15
do.
minutes, you can argue among yourselves,
good.
and then when you're ready to deliberate, I'm watching the clock.
Okay. All right, I would like to say that the company's representative did a wonderful job. And because of that, my job is easy. My job is easy because we would tend to think that they supported everything in the U.S. Starting position, that these are correctly characterized as limited risk distributors, that the services are fully supported, including the markup, and that the contract manufacturing should stay a contract manufacturing. And with that, I guess I'll entertain whatever arguments you two might have.
Great. Thanks, Steve. It's wonderful seeing you again for the 4th time this year, every quarter in Washington and Ottawa. I have this case before me today where Our auditors did an analysis on this particular Lulu company that's been in Canada. By the way, it was originally started in Canada, just so we're clear on that. But for this case, it's in the US. But for example,
Build the wall.
Build the wall. So I just wanted to point out a couple things. During the audit process, our auditors discovered a substantial amount of inconsistencies on how the Canadian company is reporting the profits in Canada of this company. Without looking at the whole company, we understand that Canada is clearly the tested party in this situation. We understand that the majority of the functions are being done in the US. However, Canada plays an important role in generating the revenues incurred in Canada. I want to point out that to put it aside, I agree with certain costs being allocated to Canada. If they are providing an enduring benefit to Canada, I truly believe they should be borne by Canada in its day-to-day operations of its business, because it saves us from spending certain amounts of money in Canada. And there should be a markup, which we can discuss during this process, anywhere in the range of 5 to 7%, depending on how the value-added function can be. So I don't think that's ever going to be a sticking point for you and I, Steve. Never has, probably never will be in the future. However, one of those costs I want to point out, that the costs that Canada just agreed to pay for, and you agreed to accept Canada paying for, is marketing costs. Canada is now bearing a portion of whatever US marketing costs have been allocated. That's number one. So whatever money you spend on your IT services in the US for marketing, Facebook, that allocate, now Canada has borne that risk of carrying that cost. Number one. Second of all, US has not provided any well-documented or any distribution agreements that points out any plan of action for marketing Lulu products in Canada. It is a fresh market for Lulu, and it's up to the Canadian operations to develop that operation, those sales in Canada, developing what we would consider, and US, Steve, you've made this case on many other files, that marketing intangibles has been developed by the money being incurred and spent during the marketing activities to sell, in this particular case, apparel goods, and that can apply to many different products. It could be argued that it shouldn't be such a markup on commodity type products, but we're clearly here today that apparel is not a commodity product. However, one thing I do want to point out, this product coming into Canada has no brand awareness. You are not charging us a royalty for using any brand name. You point out in your arguments today that there is no brand. We had to develop that here in Canada. We are not being charged a royalty, which should have been charged if there was a brand. So anything we build up and anything sales that we generate here in Canada should be to the betterment of the money, the salespeople, the brand awareness team, the merchandising's on site in Canada, all the efforts being performed by the people sitting in Canada that generated these sales in Canada. And that is also supported by the BEPS coming out of the OECD and G20. They clearly said the value creation, the asset function shifts, where they performed, are all being, in this particular case, are being performed in Canada. The boots are on the ground in Canada, the salespeople are running across, even though they're hosers, they are running across the country trying to develop a brand that didn't exist here. Because if there was a brand, Steve, you'd be first one to tell me that there should have been a royalty being charged to Canada.
And I think there was, but
okay. Well, I asked that question earlier, and there was no royalty being paid. There's no royalty being paid. I know you have to reconsider that, Steve, which is normally the case in an IRS
there is
negotiation.
a brand, yeah.
Okay.
There's a certain flight of fancy
okay, I'm still not finished, Steve. You know how it works.
Okay, keep flying.
Okay, and so these brand managers are developing a plan. The marketing plan was not provided by the U.S. No direction was provided. No distribution agreement was provided in any detail that listed what should be paid or what shouldn't be paid. It was sort of a company that wants to expand into a new market, and it was put on the efforts of the boots on the ground in the Canadian environment. I think from a perspective of how the Canada company should be compensated, I do agree the operating margin type approach is the right way to do it. parking aside the sales, or sorry, the cost being allocated to Canada. However, 3%, we're not a commodity. I think I just explained a number of reasons why it's not a commodity product. You can see all kinds of different clothes. It's trendy. It has to stay up with the environment. Everybody's changing their clothes. I get made fun of my suits because it's got flares or cuffs in my pants. So nowadays, you have to stay up with the environment, with the economy and what's changing during the process. So it's up to the people, a finger on the pulse in the country in which you're selling that product. We already determined that each country has its unique intangibles, its unique way of it lives. And so it's up to Canada, outside the atypical intangibles, to develop an intangible. So I believe it is up to, if we don't have a unique environment, then we have no different cultures in the world. So I think Canada is distinct from the US, so therefore, and distinct from China per se. Therefore, I think what we should do, Steve, is I put a new set of comparables together, and this produced a range of anywhere from 5 to 15%, because these ranges where the marketing plan, the marketing dollars, all these comparable companies have done all the marketing efforts. And in fact, this was a product that was brought into Canada in the past. And here between 5 and 15 is a good operating margin. And depending on how the sales have done from 2012 to 2014, I'll determine where I fall within that range. And that is a result of the marketing efforts that I performed, as in the taxpayer has performed during that period of time. So if you're willing to accept the operating margin approach, which I think you are, because I think you started at 3%, I think we're up to negotiating a number between 5 and 15% with these new set of comparables.
If the world worked the way you think it did and does, I'd be happy to agree, but it doesn't. In this case, there was a brand, and this is a brand that was developed in the U.S. The marketing strategy was created in the U.S. All of the strategic efforts in the area of marketing are from the U.S. And then you are correct, there are boots on the ground, but I'm not talking an army, I'm talking a few people here in Canada, and they're dealing with execution. There's marketing and there's sales. And they deal with sales in Canada. That means that basically you are working on getting more sales, which is a distributor's goal. And for that, they get paid a percentage. So a dollar of additional sales gives you a dollar of additional earnings. But it doesn't change the earning percentage.
Okay.
Okay. But the idea that there is not a brand and everything was created in Canada, I can't think of a company that works that way. The brand and the approach was created in the U.S., and I won't say that Canada is an extension of the U.S., but I will say that particularly in social media, there is an extension aspect that we talk about, competent authority back and forth, time to time, of the halo effect of the advertising in the U.S., where Canadians are watching U.S. television. Canadians are tapping into U.S. social media. So there's some boots on the ground in Canada. There's some boots in the U.S. that are addressing Canada. And so, yeah, I can't get there. I cannot get there. This 5 to 15%, this is structured correctly as a limited risk distributor. And I'm not seeing the army that you are.
Okay, I appreciate that comment. So you're willing to concede the marketing dollars that are performed in Canada have a halo effect for the U.S. economy in the sales. Is that correct?
Wow, the order of magnitude would be
Whoa.
1 versus 100.
Well, keep in mind there's 200 and something or 300 something million people in the U.S.
Well, you
and
remember
only
this is all
33 million.
created
So
in
the
Canada.
dollars spent in Canada are addressing more people that are generating sales in the
Yeah, I
US,
don't.
right?
You'd have to show me that the U.S. people are
You-
clamoring for
You brought
Canadian
it up.
content.
You brought up the halo effect. Remember,
Where's your
that's
Hollywood?
So when you think about it, the halo effect applies both sides of the border. So when you think, if you look at the percentage of dollars spent on marketing to sales, and the percentage of dollars spent on marketing to sales in the US, you may see that the percentage is much higher in Canada than in the US, unless you have facts otherwise.
But we're also, the marketing is in the US, the sales is in Canada. And the idea that, we'll let you guys use the concept of BOGO without charge.
Isn't that a fish?
No, buy one, get one?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do a lot of retail, yeah.
But-
But the idea that basically that a local sales effort in Canada is gonna have an impact on the US brand, that's a bit of a stretch for me.
Yeah, but
Hey,
you
guys,
just,
we could go at this all day. You guys have a chance to deliberate, but let's get the Shanwu to comment, and then you guys work out quickly your resolution.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. If the Chinese Competent Authority agrees everything, the Canadian Competent Authority just said, we have some additional comments. One is, our market is very different from the US, from the Canadian, and I'm happy that China is on the other side of the globe, so that there's no, whatever effect, in the US, which have a spillover effects in China. The products of this company is targeted at the young generation, right? And the population is the source of the revenue, and we have a lot of them in China.
Really?
Yes, we have 1.6 billion people, and a large proportion of that is the young generation, is the targets of this company, and you have to consider that. And also, the household's disposable income has been increasing, and I understand that this product is a premium product, and you really can't charge a price in the other developing countries other than China. And also, the Chinese people have a general preference of foreign brands like this, and we understand that even two products, one domestic, one foreign, even they are at the same level of quality, the Chinese young generation prefer foreign brands, and all of those contribute to my argument that the Chinese entity should deserve a higher return. Another thing I want to mention is that due to all the arguments made by our Canadian colleagues, we are considering two level approach for adjustments or for competent authority corresponding adjustment. The first level is that because in our view the Hong Kong principle is the simple function compared to the Chinese manufacturer and the distributor, because we view those two functions together. And we would like to use TNM, regard the Hong Kong principle as the tested party. And here is our set of comparables. We are going to assign 1% to the Hong Kong principle. And also we would like to use cup methods to test the royalty rate to the US. And we keep the residual.
Okay, guys, you got, in the sake of time, you got just 2-3 minutes. So huddle together, come up with a result, and tell us what you all will do.
okay, my question to you, Steve, is since I'm paying for the US marketing, it was allocated to from cost, how did you allocate that cost to Canada? Was it based on sales? Total sales? Like, how would you allocate your marketing costs in the US that you allocate to Canada? Because that's one of the costs I agreed to at the beginning of our conversation.
You agreed to it, but
Yeah.
I didn't talk about that.
Oh, okay, so you're not gonna, that's not one of your costs now?
We do global marketing.
Oh. Well, that's what I'm saying, you allocated
We do
global marketing to
No,
me.
we didn't allocate global marketing.
Now we're changing the facts of the case. Well, that would probably be
It's novel.
true to the point in
That's
negotiation.
happened.
That's happened
That
before.
before both sides, yeah.
No, in all seriousness, Steve, one of your discussions here today was you asked Canada to pay certain costs, accounting, legal, administrative, marketing, IT. I agreed to pay those costs with the markup,
Only
with the
one I didn't hear
markup.
was marketing. but
Well,
okay.
I can't help what you hear, but I'm just telling you the facts, okay? So I agreed to pay for them.
Thanks, Mr.
So
Trump.
therefore, if I'm paying for those marketing costs and I'm paying for the Canadian marketing costs, I think they are entitled to a substantially higher return than 3%, which leads towards a commodity type product. In addition, and to my Chinese friend as well, you clearly have not charged us any royalty payments, which clearly demonstrates that there's no value to what you're giving us to sell in Canada. So we had to build that ourselves. Because if there was a value, your company would have charged us the royalty and we would have paid that royalty payment, which would entitle an even higher return, because come with a royalty payment is entitled to a higher return when you pay a royalty. So in substance, if we're paying a marketing cost, not paying a royalty, and so therefore we're sharing in all those costs, incurring our own, I think 3% is a little insulting. Now, I'm willing to listen to something higher. I'm not willing to, I would accept a methodology, but let's talk reasonable. I think in the cases that I've been down here, probably 400 over the last 10 years, I've yet to see a company with very little brand recognition and no plans, or marketing plans instilled in Canada that would get 3%. Keep in mind, that's 3% of a sale. That would be my closing argument as the Canadian competent authority.
Well, Steve, my final comment is that, we are friends. And the reason I'm still here is because, I respect you. Do you know that, we have a foreign exchange control, and you are charging a royalty from the Chinese entity, right? And if I don't say yes, you can't pay out that royalty. And I can just walk out of the room, and all the profits are taxed in China. And do you know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So guys, take a minute, talk among yourselves, and give us where you're all coming out.
One here, or we?
I don't care where you go, I mean, but. I think, guys, I think you see that competent authority can be very difficult, and if we're going to be pushed to using maps for dispute resolution, the part of the problem is going to be that your transfer pricing policy and your future is going to be dictated very separately by how, not necessarily the commercial side of your business, but how the competent authority is going to resolve their cases. And this is...
You might want to comment on how unlikely it is that we can rely on mandatory binding arbitration provisions as an alternative.
Well, that's a whole other issue.
Well, it is, but I'm just saying.
I mean, you do have the opportunity to go to binding arbitration, and it is limited. They have the European Convention for Intra-Europe, but like with Canada, one of the best ways to get Canada to the table is tell them you're going to go to arbitration, because their record has been pretty dismal so far. But you're probably going to be dealing with the same subjectivity, which companies want to have certainty as to how they're going to, price their goods. They don't want to have controversies all over. APAs are an answer, but who knows what's going to happen with APAs and how difficult it's going to be to get APAs. But I think the point here, and I could question a lot of the arguments that were made here, but the point here is whatever resolution they come up with, nobody's going to be happy, and it's going to change your intercompany transfer pricing policy, and you're going to have to live with that. So this is one of the detriments to, appeals not being able to get direct competent authority after an appeals result, or having it removed from appeals to competent authority, or even just going directly to competent authority, because you can see here you've got major cultural issues. Yeah.
You might comment on use of the mediator or deliberating.
That's a possibility, but let's just get to where we're getting to. I mean, there were a number of comments. One of the biggest comments I had here, which nobody talked about, was functionally what's the distributor doing. The table was set right at the beginning that the distributor manages all the third-party distributors, and they're the ones who are spending the advertising. So what the distributor is functionally doing is managing its third-party distributors. The second is nobody really sat down and talked about the advertising, marketing, and spends. It's actually brand building, because you do have to have a certain amount of routine spend. But this is what can happen in a competent authority resolution, is that a lot of technical points that can be very important to a company just get pushed aside. Guys, you have a result?
No, come back in a minute.
All right, you got a minute, Steve. This is like, you know, that or you get kicked off the island for like survival. And I'll make another comment just to keep this going. Nobody really talked about, you know, the BEPS initiative, and I think it was Imke was the only one that mentioned value creation and the sanctity of marketing intangibles under BEPS. But again, nobody really broke down when they talked about advertising, marketing, and promotion, what really is expected by a distributor and what really is brand building, and those are critical issues. So let's see if these guys can wind it down.
So we're going to let this process take its course, and then eventually we can go right into to our keynote address. If we get pushed back, you know, a little late, you just have to start lunch a few minutes late. That's all.
Clark?
Back in the 90s, the U.S. this is innovative drugs, and they broke up into groups, and there were individual groups of staff people, and there were individual groups of U.S. managers. All of the staff teams reached an agreement, and none of the management teams reached an agreement.
You want to repeat that because the audience can't.
Yeah. I guess what Clark was saying is that in a prior training program between the U.S. and CRA, they broke apart the staff people and the management people. And the management people were able to come to a resolution. What?
Staff people. There's never not the managers.
That's what I said. The staff people came to a resolution. The management people couldn't come to a resolution. And you know what I think is what's really important here is they may not come to a conclusion. So the notion that you have to eliminate double taxation, that may not happen. That may not happen, particularly with China. So, competent authority, you know, Clark, as we knew it and grew up with it, may not be the same as it's going to be in the future. So, you guys making progress?
That's all right. We'll
You know, I thought Steve was going to become Canadian at one point. He said about. Yeah.
One of the interesting things that you pointed out is how folks like the panelists debate sort of business issues, and it's sort of apparent that no one there has really got any deep knowledge of brand marketing and what makes it work or not. And then when you're looking at how we're working through this problem, which is actually a very old problem, right? Brands, sort of physical goods, really the money that's out there, the issues that are out there around multi-sided platforms, which are a completely different economic beast to anything that's going on here. And it makes you wonder how the hell, you know, this mechanism will ever work when you're trying to consider where you've got subsidised parties, non-subsidised parties in sort of a marketplace type of environment. Where, you know, where you've got all the money that's actually really being made. That's where the leverage.
Well, you're right. One very, very important point that you're making and that they brought out was the distribution agreement didn't have the specificity that's required. So if you're going to have a marketing intangible, you create it by contract. So that gets you to the one issue that Mike raised about this is a fiction, because you know otherwise it would be used by the government to come in and say you're developing that market and I'm going to increase your margin. But to really have that appropriately, you create that and the subsidies, appropriate subsidies, and you determine a reimbursement on pure brand building. But that was lacking. This case purposely lacked a lot of facts so we could give these guys room to fight. But that's an important point. And the reality of it is, what constitutes brand building today has become a very sophisticated analysis. And I find a lot of people don't understand or appreciate that. They go, like if you go to India, they'll just start with advertising, marketing, and promotion, and they'll do ratios, but they don't really get into the details that they have to get into. So you have an answer.
We do. After some fighting, we ended up at U.S. Canada 6%, U.S. China 7%.
Okay, I can live with that. No
And just to
problems
give
here.
you a flavor, one of the reason why I did it, first of all, whenever you can double your money, you're always gonna win, right? So it's such a, but the reason being is that we don't know what the system profit is in this situation. And what happens in any true negotiation, you're sitting in that black box, as much as you think you wanna be principled in any aspect, dollars dictate the end discussion. So ultimately, at the end of the day, if I was sitting there and him as well, if we're sitting there saying, we're gonna take 6 or 7%, the US isn't getting much more than that. But if the system profit was 25%, it would be a very much bigger, difficult settlement at 6 or 7%. So that's why it's a big fact to know what the whole system profit is.
You're absolutely right, but I would have to assume that implicit in you getting to 6 and 7% was a recognition that there were some local marketing intangibles.
Eh. But one thing to recognize with...
Except China, they want a profit split, there's a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah, no, that's right. And the one thing to bear in mind is that this particular situations where you have the country of, the U.S. or the other country where the ultimate parent is, kind of fighting these battles and then having an issue regarding another country regarding, like here, Hong Kong, is one that's really going to repeat often under BEPS, and that basically the competent authorities are constrained to working out the transactions that are in front of them, and to the extent that there's a very relevant transaction where the U.S. IRS did not or has not completed an adjustment or hasn't raised an adjustment, just means that you really aren't supposed to consider that as in the competent authority procedure.
Have you ever familiar with the famous Capital One commercial where what's in your wallet? That has to play a lot in any good negotiator. You can't worry about what the other countries are getting as long as you're comfortable with what you're getting. So in any good negotiation, at the end of the day, you have to be able to answer that question to yourself first. And I did a trilateral APA once with Japan, US, and Canada. And let me tell you, a circular calculation to go on. As soon as one country thought the other one was getting a better deal than that country, and it was just a big circle, you could never get to a conclusion. So from a perspective of, I think Steve did an excellent job, everybody did an excellent job, just trying to get a resolution in 5 minutes.
Well, this is a very common fact pattern. And what is very common in this fact pattern is the lack of specificity with the distribution agreements and some of the details. So I thank you guys. But we have another speaker. Take 2 questions. If anybody has any questions, go ahead.
I thought we were going to hear from China about the 7%.
About the 7%, because Canada accepts 6, and China can take 1 more percent. So that's 7. That's where the 7 is from. And also,
I did all the hard work. He just carried on the coattails.
And also, although it's 7, but I think China still can get more because they are charging a royalty, right? And we impose withholding tax on top of that. So it's more than 7%.
You had a quick question?
Yeah. So I know you guys were just role-playing here, but how realistic are some of your comments that you made, such as you made a comment that China, you would bar payment of royalties, and you made a comment about brand royalty. Is that really necessary? Because I've never dealt with.
Like if it was embedded.
Yeah.
It can be embedded.
Otherwise, you would never have a LRD.
That's right.
Definition.
I was just
I did
throwing
the-
everything at the wall.
The embedded but not embedded issue
It doubles
comes
my
up
money.
when you have the title actually coming from contract manufacturer type thing, that inserts that issue in there. Yeah.
Shauna, do you want to make a comment on that, though?
Well, yes. I mean, all the comments I made, are direct and rude maybe, but sometimes competent authority, did make those types of comments.
I've been in negotiations where they had to actually shut down the negotiations. and come back hours later, or a razor would fly across the room, and because it'd be starting off one set of negotiations, and in all fairness to either side of the negotiations, and I was the manager overseeing a lot of the negotiations. I'd go from room to room and only catch the end of the argument, and then someone would just get up and they're coming back later. So it's like, but it's a fluid session, and when you go to the foreign jurisdiction, like for example, when I take my team down to Canada, down to Washington, I could have 5 members and each have 5 different cases, and they could each see 5 different IRS competent authority analysts. And so they would get 5 different personalities at the table at 5 different cases. And so if they're both limited risk distributors, you could have an IRS analyst taking one avenue on a limited risk distributor, and another IRS analyst taking it as a operating margin, full-fledged entrepreneur. And the Canadian guy could be thinking they're the same case. And so that's where you see the reality. It's human nature plays a major role in negotiation. And one of my jobs as I became more senior is to make sure I take that human element, the personality out of it, and try to get to a settlement of double taxation.
And sometimes there's just a lot of horse trading.
Yeah, I agree with what Justin said. And in practice, in preparing for competent authority negotiations, the SAT for a single case, would prepare, up to 10, scenarios, just to expect what will happen during the negotiation, and if that happens, what we will present, on the table.
Okay, I think we really need to defer to the next, I guess it's Mike? Okay, good.
Thank you very much. This was
Thanks, guys.